Morning. I think we are ready to go, or good afternoon. Great start. Firstly, I'd like to welcome everyone here today and thank you for joining us for the Irish Jobs Salary Strategy Bootcamp 2026. We're really glad to have you with us because salary expectations are evolving really fast and getting pay right has actually never mattered more. So, whether you're hiring, advising clients, or shaping your organization's pay strategy, the decisions you make this year can genuinely be the difference between attracting top talent or losing them to your competitors. So today's session is going to be all about turning insights into action. We'll be sharing the latest findings from our Irish Jobs Salary Trends Report 2026, looking at what's happening in the Irish market right now and how candidate expectations are shifting. It's designed to be practical, interactive, so definitely going to encourage you throughout the session to get involved using the chat and polls and everything else. So before we get started, though, let me introduce today's speakers. So I'm going to be joined by Julius Probst, who is our senior labour economist with the Stepstone Group. So he's going to kick us off proper with an overview of the Irish labour market and the key trends that are shaping pay right now. We also have Ciara Hurd. Ciara is senior account manager within IrishJobs. She's going to be sharing what we're seeing on the ground, how employers are responding to the changes and where organizations are feeling the most pressure. I would say Ciara is also our international expert. So we work with multiple platforms throughout the globe. So if you have any questions on international recruitment, Ciara is your go-to for that as well. For those of you who I haven't met before, I'm Chris Pay. I'm the country director for the Stepstone Group in Ireland, which includes IrishJobs. We do have a pretty jam-packed session today. We're going to be drawing on a lot of salary data from 2025, alongside some fresh survey insights that we've just conducted with both job seekers and HR professionals. But it's really important today we don't just show you the data, but we try and help you understand what it means for your hiring and salary decisions in 2026. So before I hand over to Julius, a really quick look at what we're going to be looking at. So as I said, Julius will talk about kind of the macroeconomic conditions and how that is shaping Ireland from a macroeconomic overview. I'll discuss salaries at a glance, and that will lead us into kind of the great divide and how the labour market is divided at the moment. Then Ciara will jump in and talk about what candidates really want, and I'll end today with talking about EU pay transparency directive. As I said, please use the chat function. If you've questions, use the question function. We'll try and weave your questions or your chat into the conversation as we go. So if there is anything that you springs to mind, just pop it into the chat. So before I pass over to Julius, I just thought, let's make sure the chat's working. So let me just ask a really quick question. I'd love to understand, and in one word for each one, how would you describe this year's hiring landscape? So the start of 2026, in one word, how would you describe the hiring landscape? And I'd also be interested to understand what would you wish from 2026 in terms of a hiring landscape? Frustrating. Okay, straight in there. I agree, Karen, I have to say. Challenging, yeah. Difficult. Yeah. So far, no positives, but I don't think that's a huge surprise. It is really difficult at the moment, and sparse is a really good observation and one we're going to speak about a lot, Julian, actually. So good to see it in there. Thanks, William, for contributing there. Always good to feel we're on the same page. But at this stage, I'm going to hand over to Julius and ask him to talk about the macroeconomic overview.
Yes, thank you, Chris. And yeah, as we saw in the chat, a lot of you are answering challenging, difficult, and yeah, I guess it's not an easy market, huh? So I just want to discuss the macro overview a little bit, Ireland's hiring landscape. Not to worry, I'm a macroeconomist by trade, but I'm not gonna use too many fancy technical words. It's just something very, very easy about the labor market, how it has performed, what are the recruitment and labor economic trends that we are seeing right now. Yeah. So no worries. So let us start with kind of like where Ireland's job market is right now. This chart is showing us kind of like the total number of vacancies in the Irish labor market. And what we're seeing is that there was a massive increase coming out of the pandemic. There was like a significant hiring boom throughout 2021 and 2022 that was mirroring kind of like other European labor markets and the US as well, right? There was a global hiring boom coming out of the pandemic. And then that hiring boom stopped and the number of vacancies fell. And in some markets, it fell quite significantly. That's the case for the UK. That's the case for Germany, other European markets. But if you look at Ireland, you can see there was kind of like there was a decline throughout 2022 and 2023. But over the last year, vacancies have kind of increased again. Yeah. And just comparing the 2025 to 2019 figure, we see that the number of vacancies in Ireland is actually significantly higher than before the pandemic. So Ireland is a little bit of an exception, and the labor market is actually relatively tight. Okay. Um, if we have a look at kind of like unemployment and the employment rate, another two key labor market metrics, what do we see there? The red line in the lower pane of this graph is showing you the unemployment rate. Yeah, so we're currently at about 5% unemployment in Ireland. That is a tiny little bit higher than 2 years ago, but really not that much. So the unemployment rate increased a tiny little bit. Historically, if we were to zoom out, 5% unemployment is historically a very, very low unemployment rate. Yeah, so there's really not that many people in Ireland who are unemployed right now. A very low unemployment rate. It is a tight labor market. And then if you look at the upper pane of this graph, this is in combination with a record high employment rate. Yeah, so the employment rate currently stands at about 75% almost, and that is 2 percentage points higher than before the pandemic. And so what that means is that basically the tight labor market has been pulling workers into the labor market after the pandemic. We're seeing quite high vacancies. We're seeing a very low unemployment rate, and employment is relatively high. Now, if we look at kind of like the sectors that have been creating jobs, then you see that employment growth has been relatively kind of like broad-based across all sectors. Yeah. So what this chart is kind of shows you is kind of like employment growth since Q1 of 2020. We can see kind of like, for example, accommodation and food services is one of the slowest kind of growing sectors, but still it's like 10% higher than in Q1 of 2020. We have some other sectors that have been performing well. On average, employment is kind of like some 20% higher than in early 2020. What stands out to me is that scientific and technical services have seen quite significant growth. Construction is up by quite a lot as well. So we are just kind of like seeing broad-based employment growth across all sectors. And obviously, this employment growth has also been supported by high levels of immigration in the case of Ireland. Yeah. So if we look at this chart, then what we're seeing is that immigration has noticeably picked up in recent years. If you go back, you can see kind of like two booming periods that stand out to me. The kind of like the red line is the number of immigrants, and the blue line is the number of people emigrating from Ireland to other countries. And obviously, right now, net migration is positive and very, very high, right? So Ireland is receiving the inflow into Ireland is significantly higher than the outflow. And so there have been like two periods where that was the case. The first one was kind of like in the early 2000s and mid 2000s up to the financial crisis, right? Back then, Ireland's economy was also booming, very high growth rates, a very strong labor market that has been pulling people into Ireland, searching for jobs, coming to Ireland, and adding to employment. Then we had the financial crisis, and actually for a few years, Ireland saw more people leaving than coming, right? If you look at the lower pane, the bars are slightly negative in the period throughout 2010 to about 2014. But now in recent years, over the last few years, we are seeing very strong net migration levels again. Some 60, 70,000 people coming net on an annual basis. And that level of migration has supported the job growth, right? So the level of job growth we have seen in Ireland wouldn't have been possible without these high levels of migration. And that is a fact for advanced economies because of adverse demographics, an aging population. If you want to have positive job growth, then to some extent in Ireland, in the UK, in Germany, you need to have positive migration levels. Obviously, the strong labor market, the strong economy then has supported the job growth. But let's also talk about wages and inflation a little bit. So one kind of like negative aspect of the period in recent years following the pandemic, the period through 2020 to 2024, 2025, is obviously that we had this massive inflationary shock that we all know about, that we all have felt to some extent, the cost of living crisis. And Eurozone inflation was up to almost 9 or 10% in the period through 2022, 2023. Now Eurozone inflation is back at 2%. Ireland is a little bit of an outlier. Ireland still has actually slightly higher inflation than the Eurozone average. And so what does that mean for wages and wage growth? So this chart shows you kind of like how wages have performed since 2020 over the last few years. It is rebased to 100, right? So in early 2020. And you can kind of like see two big trends. First of all, the upper line is information and communication. That is the tech sector. Wages in the tech sector have gone up by almost 40% since 2020. So very high wage growth in tech specifically, whereas other sectors kind of like have grown a little bit less, like health and social work, construction, accommodation and food services. All of these are only up by about 27, 29% since 2020, right? This is nominal wage growth. So tech has outperformed very high wage growth. What about inflation? That is one of the lower lines. The consumer price index is up by about 24%. So what really stands out there is that wage growth has been positive since 2020, but it really hasn't outperformed the consumer price index by a lot, right? So inflation is up by 24%, wages a little bit more. So unless you are probably a worker in information and communication, in tech or in finance, your inflation adjusted wage growth probably hasn't been that great. And that is probably particularly true if you are a renter. We all know about the problems in cities like London, Dublin. Dublin is also a housing hotspot city, right? If you are renting, then probably your rent inflation has been higher. And food price inflation has also been higher than the average inflation rate. Grocery prices have outperformed the average inflation rate. And so what that means for cost of living, obviously, especially if you are kind of like more on the lower side, lower income earners, is that probably you have struggled a little bit in recent years. So the cost of living crisis is definitely real. Yeah. So, and then obviously related to that, let's talk about this a little bit more. What does that mean? What does the squeeze mean for workers? What does it mean for businesses? What is the business impact of that? here we would kind of like, how has the economic situation in Ireland impacted your business? Feel free to again share your thoughts in the chat. What has the cost of living crisis meant for you? Has your business struggled? Have you seen that this massive wage growth has been a problem in your particular sector? Feel free to put in your thoughts as well. I see that there are also some questions about pharma and engineering when it comes to wage growth. These are good questions. Pharma is probably also on the higher side, but these were just wage growth series for kind of like the very broad sector. So I didn't include pharma in the chart, but as a like high paid professional service, it's probably on the higher side. Um, okay, yeah. So let's move on and quickly discuss how the cost of living is affecting both businesses and workers. So obviously, on the one hand, as I discussed, with the high rates of inflation, we are also seeing wage growth. 58% of workers have received a pay rise in 2025. But at the same time, and that figure is actually quite striking, we see that 49% of workers have cut on leisure and social spending, right? And as I emphasized before, this is directly related to the cost of living crisis. If your wages go up by 3 or 4%, but grocery prices are just increasing even more, then that is directly a result of that. 27% of workers had to cut back on essential spending. So that is also a fair amount. And that is particularly impacting kind of like workers in lower income sectors. Let's think about hospitality and so on. Yeah. On the other hand, if we look at businesses, we are also seeing that 61% of businesses are saying that the rising cost of living has had a significant impact on salary decisions. So businesses are also feeling the squeeze, higher energy prices, higher wage costs, other regulatory burdens. So businesses are being squeezed as well on the cost front, and that is impacting business decisions. Yeah, so that was it more or less from my part. I think, Chris, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Julius. Obviously, really interesting stuff, and I think it's something that we've spoken about quite a lot recently about how those high inflationary costs have really impacted on salaries, and which is what I'm going to go into a little bit more now. So Julius has just talked about this, that advertised salaries are continuing to rise. And we are seeing a slight decline now in job ads, which is normally a clear sign of a cooling labour market. But what hasn't cooled is demand for skills. And I know, Regina, you mentioned engineering, and someone in human resources, not a name, mentioned pharma industry. So like those high in demand skills are something we're going to speak about shortly as well. But it's because that competition for experienced talent remains really strong, and that pressure is still pushing salaries upwards. Salary is the number one reason why people are looking to move roles at the moment, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. But what's really more interesting, and probably will bring Kira into it in a little while, is that our salary trends report is really highlighting it's about much more than salary now. It's about everything that comes after that. And that's where recruiters really need to try and stand out in 2026 and beyond, because that's the data we're seeing. And we'll dive a little bit more into it now. But before we do, make sure you're still awake and everyone's still here. What's the median advertised salary in Ireland? And as you're answering, I'll just make sure that we're all aligned on the median. So, of course, we have removed the kind of outliers, those big salaries at the top. So this should be what a typical earner in Ireland is earning, as opposed to the average. Okay. Very close between 49 and 55K. Okay, so we've kind of 60% of people have nearly answered. It's definitely leaning slightly more towards 49K. I think that's pretty close, but not quite. The answer is actually 54,928 euro. And again, that's a median salary, but we can compare it to countries that we work with quite a lot. So we have businesses obviously in Germany and the UK, and we've done this report alongside them. And in Germany, it's 54K. So we're very on par with our German neighbours. The UK is probably more interesting. They're kind of in the mid 30s when it comes to median advertised salaries. So they're all they're quite far away from where we are in Ireland currently. But as I said, it's 54,928 euro is the median advertised salary. And before I go on, I meant to ask Julius earlier, do you think we should continue to see this trend going forward? Will we expect this when we look at this in a year's time, that the median advertised salary has continued to increase?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, given that inflation is still running at a rate of 3% in Ireland, and kind of like this cost of living shock has also led to kind of like workers' expectations changing significantly to before the pandemic. Everyone has inflation in mind. I would expect higher wage growth to continue going forward and not disappear anytime soon.
I suppose it kind of feels sometimes like that's good news, but it doesn't necessarily translate to that, because salaries increasing, of course, can drive everything else to increase on top of it. But Sarah, I've noticed you've put in the chat there as well, wondering about the engineering median. So you're going to be really happy with me in about a slide's time, because I have that there. So I will show it to you very shortly. But before I do that, just looking at where is the split in Ireland. Dublin, no surprise, is number one. Obviously, it does command the highest median salary, because the cost of living is the highest here. We've also obviously got where we are here today. We're in the Docklands, so we've got huge amount of large tech firms, all located or mostly located certainly in Dublin and around this area. Your Googles, your Metas, TikToks, all that, and they are paying a higher salary. So I don't think it's any surprise we see Dublin there. Possibly more surprising is that Galway is ahead of Cork. I think if I think about it, it seems to be more aligned with, maybe we go back to that high skills demand and the scarcity of skills, and you see a lot of medical devices companies that are located in Galway, and I think definitely would be driving up that median. But Cork is coming in third at 46K. So I don't think anyone in Cork ever likes to be third, and I get away with saying that because my wife's from Cork. But interesting all the same to see Galway ahead of Cork at the moment. I think it's also interesting to point out that location-based pay, it's really relevant, but it's actually no longer the whole story, because candidates are comparing offers across cities more than ever. They're obviously weighing up the slightly lower pay against quality of life. Obviously, there are lots of businesses offering hybrid, remote, more flexible roles. But one of the things we're seeing over and over again, where people are deciding to go, is based on what their long-term progression is. So that's something that in 2026 is going to be really important. So as promised, there's engineering. It is 70K is the median. And again, that is the typical earner. It's not an average salary, it's a typical earner. So slightly different when you remove the larger outliers. But there's a clear pattern here. Technology, banking, finance continue to sit at the top, closely followed by those other sectors that rely on scarce specialist skill sets. So your legal, your construction, engineering, basically anything you hear on the news that we constantly have a shortage of workers for, they're obviously sitting in this table, because we probably don't need Julius to tell us, but the basic economics of supply and demand obviously come heavily into that. So that scarcity continues to put upward pressure on pay. And I think that's not going to go away anytime soon. Personally, I'm really interested to see what happens within engineering and construction, because I feel that's where the scarcity really lies at the moment. And it will be very interesting to see with our large infrastructure projects coming up in Ireland, how that develops over the next year or so. Will that be starting to head towards first place? But if I look at candidates and their satisfaction, salary and benefits, like, they're now hand in hand. They're both really important. You don't get away with just paying a decent salary. Benefits are now being looked at. They want the whole package. But the good news is, if we look at how candidates are feeling, 75% of workers were actually very satisfied with their salary. And I think that's actually a very good reflection on the market at the moment of businesses in general. And more so that 73% who are very satisfied with their benefits. Again, I think that's a really good thing that we've done in Ireland, that businesses have adapted very well. Of course, within that, you're going to have that hybrid model, that flexibility, all that stuff that people now expect. But as well as that, I think Ireland has become very good at recognising additional annual leave entitlement, recognising where maybe it's appropriate to match a pension contribution. So businesses have worked really well to adapt to that whole package. And it's again going to be very important in 2026, and something that would be really good for businesses to be really shouting from the rooftops when they're getting their job ads out there. But it's not all good news in it. Obviously, within any percentage, there are ups and downs. So tech workers are 86% satisfied. Probably not a huge surprise, given Julius mentioned it earlier, that their wage has gone up by 40%. I think retail at 82% was one I was surprised at, but retail are showing large satisfaction. And then we see manufacturing at 67% satisfaction, bringing down a little bit. One of the ones that was probably more interesting is banking and finance. One of the highest paid industries. When we go back to what we looked at before, it had the highest median salary alongside tech, but only 69% of workers are satisfied with their salary there. So I think that that's interesting. But as I said, that's only one piece of the pie. It's about well-being, it's about work-life balance, flexibility, and more and more and more we're hearing about career progression. And I will talk about it in a little bit. But very quickly, just to look at our smaller businesses versus our larger businesses, and how do they compare? And to be fair, SMEs are the businesses often most under pressure, and high cost of living, high increases in gas, electricity do impact them more. But their workers are saying, actually, we're okay, we're pretty happy with our salaries at the moment, and that shows that businesses have adapted well. Again, benefits which you would often associate with those big tech firms, but I think again bringing in that hybrid model, flexibility, staggered start and finish times, like there's been a huge shift in the workplace in the last 4 or 5 years. And as a result, those within the SME industry, you do have the ability to maybe match some of those benefits where you can't match free food all day or pool tables and all that. There is other ways you can match. And again, those working in the SME sector are saying they're pretty satisfied. I suppose where it's a little bit harder is that progression. Obviously, if you're within an SME organization, there is a ceiling. There's probably only so many places you can go, but 40% don't see career progression opportunities. But what's probably more worrying is for 53% of candidates who work in that sector, they're saying it's becoming a bit of a deal breaker for them. So that is going to make it difficult to retain those people if they are looking at how do I progress in my career if they can't do it within the SME sector. But compared to large businesses, it's actually not hugely different. So again, we've 77% are satisfied with their salary. We've 75% satisfied with their benefits. So that's really good. But 60% of large business candidates, so those who are already working in large businesses, wouldn't apply for a role without career progression opportunities. And 54% said that they would just pass on jobs that didn't offer hybrid or remote working options. So there is still work to be done, because if you can't shout from the rooftop, this is the progression opportunities we have in place early on, there's a good chance you're already losing out on candidates. But up to now, I've kind of looked at what's happening in the market overall, the salaries, the sectors, pressure points, and expectations. But before I go on, I think there is actually a couple of questions in there that have been answered. Okay. Okay, Julius has answered in the chat, so we can keep going. But up to now, so we have looked at the market overall, but what we wanted to try and understand next was how all that is translating into real decisions being made by workers across Ireland. So in our survey, we just asked them one question. Are you planning to stay put in 2026, or are you planning on moving in 2026? And I think that's obviously was something that gave us the biggest insight into how the market is shifting at the moment. Because what was really interesting was that 44% of professionals said that they were going to look for a new job in 2026. And it was typically those with in demand skills. And their number one motivator being salary. So 76%, so 3 out of 4 said, I'm planning on leaving my job this year, looking for a new job, and I want more money. That's basically it. But then there were 43% who said, I'm actually going to stay put. And most of them were quite happy with their salary. So you have this two-track labour market that's starting to take place. And when we've looked at this previously, it's never been that close. You might have 20% or 30% thinking of leaving or whatever it might be, but it's never really 50-50. So when we looked into it a little bit more, we can kind of see the reasons. And as I said, those switchers are primarily looking at how do I get higher salary and more progression, but their mobility is strongest because they've scarce skills. So again, going back to your engineering, going back to your construction, whatever it might be, they know I'm in high demand and I can move and not be too worried about it because I'll get a job somewhere else if I want, and I can command higher salaries every time I move. This, on the other hand, we're seeing the stayers who are looking at it from a safety perspective. So 52% of them said, well, actually, job security and stability is the reason I'm going to stay. So where they don't have the same level of in-demand skills, they're not willing to take a risk during kind of what's probably been a bit of a perma crisis for a number of years. So they're not willing to take a risk now and move. So I think that's led to this two-track workforce that we haven't really seen so much before. And what's the differentiator? As I said, it's those skills. So we're now looking at the skills that are commanding the highest, that are in the highest demand right now. And as a result, they're kind of commanding the strongest salary premiums. So what stands out immediately from this list to me is that it's not dominated by one single type of skill. You've got leadership and people management sitting at the top. That's pretty normal, and it kind of reflects the ongoing demand for those who can lead teams through change. Then you've got project management, technical expertise, and compliance knowledge. They're all following closely behind, highlighting the need for people who can deliver, adapt, and operate in those kind of increasingly complex environments. I think what's interesting is soft skills are appearing alongside technical ones, and that seems to be getting more and more important to employers. When we think of soft skills like teamwork, adaptability, being able to read a room, being able to speak and solve problems as a group together, they're becoming more and more important to employers. And I think that that's probably no surprise why then we're seeing more and more employers saying, well, we'd like you to come back to the office, even on a hybrid model, for those that we're allowing fully remote, because we are seeing that it's something that employers value those soft skills a lot, but they are telling us that they feel that it is missing from people in the workforce right now. So for employers and employees, skills and development should no longer be secondary considerations because they're not for candidates. They sit right alongside pay. So if we look at those who are actively job hunting, 31% have told us they're looking for better pay and progression overall. But more than half of candidates have told us they wouldn't apply for a role if career progression isn't clearly offered. So they won't even apply. They will look at your job spec, and if they don't see something that tells them I can move through this business, they won't apply. So it's becoming more and more important that that is laid out from the start. It's more pronounced with younger workers, so those who are between 18 and 29. They're really interested in acquiring future skills and doing work that feels more meaningful. And their two leading career goals are around that. So for employers, progression and development, they're no longer retention tools. They're actually now becoming attraction tools. So candidates want to know not just what the job pays today, but where it can take them next. And this is where employers can really differentiate themselves. And I'm going to pass over to Kira now, who can talk more around what the candidates are telling us that they want.
Thanks, Chris, for that. So what I am going to discuss is what candidates really want. I'm in IrishJobs coming up to 15 years, so I can see what's happening on the ground. So when you put it all together, salary and skills explain only a part of the story, but not all of it. So what's becoming clear is that benefits such as well-being, flexibility, and progression are no longer nice to haves. They're shaping whether people stay, move, or even apply to a role in the first place. So most candidates will actually scan a job advertisement for this information before reading anything else in detail. And in this section, we're going to take a closer look at benefits and what we found candidates actually want in 2026, where employers are over or under investing and how these choices are influencing hiring outcomes. Now, I did notice in the chat there that there's a couple of people saying, how can us working for small businesses compete with offerings with large organizations? And that's something that we can kind of go into a little bit more detail about and answer these kind of questions that you're asking. So candidates are looking for work-life balance, health cover, and progression beyond salary. So this section brings together two very important perspectives: what candidates say they want from their employer and how those priorities are evolving in 2026. So when we look at the top 5 benefits desired by candidates, we can see a shift in expectations. So health insurance at 38% now is the top of the list of most desired benefits. And that's just ahead of flexible working hours by 1% at 37%. Now, this still, flexible working hours still dominates our other markets, such as the north of Ireland, the UK, and Germany. But it is a notable change as it reflects a workforce that's placing greater value on health, well-being, and long-term security. So flexible working remains critical. But what is changing is the broader mindset. People are thinking more and more about stability, protection, and sustainability in their working lives. We also see a strong demand for enhanced pensions at 35%. And we can see performance bonus or commission at 29%. You can see improved sick pay, and that's all pointing to a desire for security and fairness and not just flexibility. So the message here is clear: is candidates are not just comparing salaries anymore, they're comparing the total packages that are offered by different companies. So if we move on to this, candidate goals beyond salaries. And what they're looking for is improved overall well-being and career satisfaction. And for employers, this is an opportunity when salary budgets are tight, when you can't offer any more additional in the salaries. This is where benefits, flexibility, and progression are often deciding factors. And I know Chris and Julius have already spoken about this, is that progression is so important for candidates. And that interest turns into applications, or the alternative, which is silence. So you can see this slide shows us what candidates are actually aiming for in 2026. Yes, the number one is earning more money with the cost of living at 41%, and that's still the number one goal. But what follows immediately after that is quite telling. So you can see improving work-life balance at 34%, reducing stress at 31%, and doing meaningful work and acquiring new skills too. It just signals a real shift in the mindset. People aren't just looking to progress, they want to protect their well-being as well. And this impact is very real, with 38% of people saying they're staying with their current employer specifically because of the good work-life balance. So well-being, flexibility, and balance aren't just soft concepts, they're powerful retention tools also. So for employers, the message is simple: candidates want careers that are sustainable for success. Now, there was another question I saw in the chat there, and it's, if you can't offer salaries, what else can we do? And this is something that we can offer, is what we're taking a pay cut for. And based on the median salary, which Chris had said it earlier on, a 5% pay cut, which is approximately €2,700, is something that many workers would accept in exchange for benefits. So life insurance, enhanced life insurance at 40%, enhanced pension contributions at 31%, share schemes, sick pay, all ranked really, really highly here, and showing that security and protection are incredibly powerful. So even with flexibility and career development appear again here, they are slightly lower down in that list. But this tells us that candidates see it as foundational rather than optional. So for employers, this is a crucial insight. When salary budgets are tight, benefits are not the consolation prize, it's a strategic tool. And in many cases, a more effective way to stay competitive. And these are some of the deal breakers, what candidates won't apply to a vacancy without these top benefits. And something useful for all business to know is that, unsurprisingly, the highest response was hybrid work. And I know we've spoken about this a lot today, and that's at 56%. Career development is at 53%, and flexible working options are at 41%. So although flexible working was replaced this year by health insurance as a top desired benefit, 41% of candidates say they won't even apply for a role if flexible working isn't offered. So that's something that needs to be put onto job descriptions, onto every single thing that you're advertising about the role. And 38% say a good work-life balance is key, that they're staying put and staying where they are. So there also needs to be understanding around commuting, childcare, work-life balance, which is a huge value to candidates. We can see after housing in the media almost daily, we see every single motorway across Ireland is absolutely chocker-blocked. So if you are able to offer this flexible and hybrid option, it's a huge advantage. More and more people are moving out of the cities, and it's taken some people up to 2 hours to commute to the office each way. So offering this is a really, really attractive thing. For example, here in IrishJobs alone, we have people commuting from Galway, Cavan, Meath, Louth, Kildare, all over Dublin to our offices here in the Docklands. So the hybrid model really, really works for our company. And flexibility and progression isn't just about attraction. It's a major retention lever as well. I'm here, as I said, almost 15 years now. And for me, being able to drop my son to school a couple of days a week means more to me than anything else. So having that flexibility means that I'm not getting up at the crack of dawn to come into the office 5 days a week. I'm not getting the kids rushing out and having a full day's work done even before 9 o'clock. So that means a lot more to me than anything else. So how do we tick the candidates' boxes, and while they tick most boxes for your open role? At this point, it's not just about whether a candidate fits your role, it's about whether the role fits the candidate. And firstly, are the roles designed for your long-term or just for today's vacancy? Secondly, what are the true negotiables on both sides? Not preferences, but deal breakers. And thirdly, is your employer value proposition as strong as your compensation package? Because in 2026, people don't just choose jobs, they're choosing environments, they're choosing cultures and futures. So the organizations that get this right don't just fill the roles, they're also building loyalty too. And to win in 2026, your job evaluation must answer 4 questions. Is it secure? Is it flexible? Is it transparent? And is it progressive? And in this time, job descriptions or job advertisements are so important when attracting candidates now. Along with these 4 really important questions, we also need to see, does it include a salary? Are the benefits listed? I know Chris is going to talk about the Pay Transparency Act, but we're asking companies to start doing the salaries right now, because we can see typically 2.5 times more quality applications when a salary and benefits are listed. So not only will you get more applications, you'll find that you'll get more quality applications. And I would always give the advice to my clients, think like a job seeker. Would you apply to this role if you were looking for a job? If the answer is no, it needs to be relooked at. And if the answer is yes, that's something that you're ticking the boxes. Another thing is when we have the candidate's attention, when they click on the job posting or the job advertisement, we need to ensure that they're clicking on that apply button. And asking these types of questions will definitely ensure more quality and quantity applications. On a side note as well, another tip I would always recommend is do the candidate journey yourself on a phone or a mobile device, because typically that's where most candidates are looking for a new role. And apply for that step by step and do that candidate journey yourself. How long does it take? Are there barriers to applying? Do you need to create a login and a password? How many questions or step? And literally time it as you're going along. If you're coming across barriers, candidates are also coming across these barriers too. And that will stop candidates from applying. So to sum it all up, salary is extremely important to candidates, but there is other factors such as flexibility, hybrid working, and health insurance, which are all also very attractive when a candidate is considering a role. And now I will pass it over to Chris again.
Thanks, Ciara. Really interesting. And like Ciara said, she's here with us 15 years, so she knows what she's talking about. She's at the front and center dealing with candidates, dealing with companies. So some really good advice there, particularly taking that candidate journey, because it can be really frustrating applying for a role, particularly with more people using their mobile phones. So definitely something we always encourage people to do. There was a couple of questions that I've gone back through the chat there just to make sure we haven't missed anything. So Sarah, you asked, when advertising salaries, what are the trends? Is it to show a starting point or more like a range? And welcome to Ireland, since you said you're new in Ireland. Do you know what in a strange way, the starting point is nothing, because not enough businesses are advertising salary. I'll speak about it in a few minutes, but actually it's only 52% of companies are advertising salaries at all, but it actually only translates to 38%. Now, when I speak about the EU Pay Transparency Directive, we'll talk about what the requirements are, and that will be bands. So I think that will become the norm, but it isn't right now. I think the other couple of questions, how can us working for smaller businesses compete with the offerings of large orgs? It's been a challenge for us. I think if we take a step back, 98% of businesses in Ireland have under 50 staff. And 50 staff is still quite a large business. 93% actually have under 10 staff. So the competition in the main is with smaller businesses. So I'd go back to everything we've spoken about today. Salary is really key. Flexibility is also very much key, and that a lot of it is around that hybrid working model. And Ciara speaking about being able to drop her son to school a couple of days a week. All of that is really important. But progression, if you can figure out a way that you can show clearly that there is progression within your organization, I think that is something that you can compete really well with. The bigger firms do it already. They do tell people about it. So it's something that smaller businesses need to try and compete with. It is very difficult. But there's also a lot of people who prefer to work in a business where they've a little bit of a seat at the table. We're quite a large organization now because we were purchased by the Stepstone Group in 2013. But when I joined this business, one of the things I often speak about is the fact that I felt I got a seat at the table pretty early. I was only 22, but I kind of felt that I got to know our CEO and our CFO, and we were a much smaller business because we play football together on a Monday night. And actually, I think there are huge benefits that people sometimes don't think about. But would I have progressed through an organization that was much bigger? I don't know is the answer, but I got to know people on both a professional and a personal level. And I think it's something SMEs have to offer that other businesses don't always have. And another question then, how can we practically and effectively communicate security, progression, etc. in our recruitment comms and speak to those candidate needs? I'm going to take a really simple answer here, and it's something I spoke about at our last webinar actually, and that is the level of work that people are doing manually that you can ask for a little bit of help with. We're in a unique time now where we have this introduction of ChatGPT and AI, and being honest, they're the types of things that they can help with. I'm always encouraging businesses, use ChatGPT to help you with your job spec by telling them those prompts, exactly what you've just said here, and then humify it and make it that it makes sense for your business. So I would actually start there, and I bet you'll find fairly quickly in 10, 15 minutes, you'll get a really, really good job spec that makes sense for your business and shows that there is security and that there is progression. And then on your own website and things like that, doing videos by people who've progressed through the company, like Kira here with us, and we've lots of examples of people who've moved into new roles, have moved departments. So I think trying to give yourself that opportunity using video, using technology to show exactly what you have to offer. So I hope I have gotten to all the questions, but if not, we will come back to them. We've Q&A at the end, and I'm sure someone is keeping an eye. But moving on, I'll speak quickly about transparency. And I think for a long time, transparency has been talked about as a bit of a nice to have. But in Ireland and the EU now, the conversation is shifting. And what we're going to look at next will have a real impact on how organizations set, communicate, and justify pay going forward. But before we do, let's just make sure everyone is still here. What percentage of candidates do you think want to know the salary before they apply? So 63, 68, 72, 87. This is we've got a clear winner. I could stop right now and this one won't be caught. So yeah, it's interesting. If I was asked this question, I would click 87% and wonder why 100% wasn't there to be asked. But we're all wrong, because the answer was actually 72%. So for some reason, 1 in 4 candidates doesn't want to know the salary before they decide to apply. But more importantly, 3 out of 4 do. And I think it will only get larger. And it's not actually about just being curious. It's about building efficiency and trust. Candidates actually don't want to invest time in an application process if there's a risk the role won't meet their expectations. Bearing in mind, we're probably asking more of candidates than ever before to fill in applications, to go through systems that might have a large amount of questions in there. Candidates are often tailoring their CV to suit a role, and they will spend time, hopefully, trying to match their CV to the role. But if they don't see the salary, they're kind of not as happy about it. But I think equally, everyone here should be thinking, do you really want to progress with candidates who are never aligned on salary in the first place? And often what we've probably seen is a bit of an unfairness where we don't have the transparency, and we see that dreaded question if you're applying for a role, what are your salary expectations? And everyone's absolutely freaked that I don't know what to put down here because I don't want to sell myself short. I also don't know if I'll get knocked out by an auto knockout because I put in too high a salary. So I think transparency will become really important. So transparency, it's our new baseline. 72% of candidates said they actively avoid applying for roles that don't list salary information. So if you're not showing that data, you're actually invisible to most of the market. Like 72% is a huge amount. But I mentioned it when I was answering your question, Sarah. We say it here, 52% are already sharing some salary ranges. That's really good. It needs to get better, but it only equated to 38% of job ads in Ireland in 2025. So it means 48% of companies lost out on 72% of candidates for their ads. And I think it is going to shift as the EU Pay Transparency Directive comes in. But that the reality is the requirement isn't to display a salary or a salary range. You just have to communicate it early in the process. But this won't change. If you're not communicating it on the job ad, people won't apply for the role. Right, I saw questions coming in, so I'm going to stop while I double check that we have answered them all. Is there a common mistake you see recruiters making on their job ads time and time again? How can we avoid? I don't think there's really a common mistake that recruiters make, but again, I think it's important that we keep going back to what's important. Display your salary, you'll get more applications, you'll get better quality applications. There's a war for talent. Make sure that you are including your benefits, and particularly, do you offer flexibility? Do you offer hybrid model? Do you offer staggered start and finish times? More and more important are healthcare, pension contribution. All those things are really important. If you have them, shout for them. If you don't have them, there is a consideration to look into what you can offer. So I think that that's really, really important as well.
And Chris, can I just pop in there as well? What I can see is that with the job ads, and you're absolutely right about the salary, about the benefits. What we see time and time again is comprehensive benefits included, and it's not listed step by step as in what exactly is the benefit package. And I think that's so important. Like, I had a client there recently where parking was available, but it wasn't listed. And when I asked why, they said, oh, sure, we thought that was just assumed, because where they were located. And I'm like, you can't assume anything. And as soon as I put that onto the job description, they saw a pretty decent uplift in applications. So just remember, it's a very competitive market. So and you are competing with somebody else. So you need to have everything listed in the job ad.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks, Ciara. There was one more question in here about the community and voluntary sector, and obviously, when you're in kind of a charity sector, it is hard to offer higher salaries. Have you any ideas? Again, I think if you look at a lot of CEOs or something like that within those sectors, a lot of them have progressed through, and that is really important to people. Salary is a big, big, big deal for a lot of people, but so is career progression. We spoke about those 18 to 29-year-olds who are also talking about that meaningful work. And I don't know if there's many organizations who can match the community and voluntary sector when it comes to meaningful work. So unfortunately, the pool is probably more shallow, but there is definitely a lot more you can shout for. And I would go back to that progression piece, because I would suggest that you probably have more to offer there than a lot of businesses would have, and that you maybe even realize. But moving on, we're looking here that over 1 in 3 businesses are losing candidates when salary isn't discussed early enough. And I think this is going to change, because it has to under the EU Pay Transparency Directive. But 39% of recruiters have told us candidates often, or very often, drop out of the process when salary is delayed. So it's not a fringe issue, it's a systemic one. But what's really interesting then is there are big problems with that. And the outcomes are you've got this longer time to hire. And actually we've seen that that's a massive increase recently, where the average time to hire in Ireland is now 70 days. So if someone hands in their notice and they leave after 30 days, you've got a 40-day gap. So if you're having people drop out of the process earlier because you're not discussing salary, you're already elongating that 70 days to hire, when it's actually something that has to change and come down. Because on top of that, not only are you increasing workload for the recruiters, but all the other employees that have to pick up the slack when you're hiring for someone who you're replacing and has already left. And then I suppose this is a really interesting slide, and I think more than ever it's important. Obviously, large businesses have to report now on their gender pay gap. We had to do it ourselves, and like ours is available. Please feel free to download and read it. And it was really interesting. We were pretty good. I think we, as a business, we were very happy that we pay transparently and fairly, and it worked out. But what jumped out to me here is that women kind of looking at it going, I don't feel my worth in the same way that a man does. And it's a really, really difficult one that as employers, we actually need to navigate together to make sure that with transparency, both men and women understand what their true value in the market is. And I think that will come with this EU Pay Transparency Directive. It will come with the gender pay gap reporting. They're really, really important. But I suppose it goes back to that. You often hear that a man will apply for a role where he can do 70% of it, whereas a woman won't apply if she can't do 100%. And it's just showing that equates all the way down to salary. And I think it's something really, really important that will come out of the gender pay gap over time. And I really hope that we when we run this again in a year's time or so, that is no longer such a big gap. But I suppose everything we've looked at shows why salary transparency has become such a critical issue for hiring, but also for retention. Whereas I think organizations could kind of treat transparency as a bit of a choice. What's changing now is it's no longer a choice. The candidate expectations or employer preference, it is you have to do it. So when the introduction of the EU Pay Transparency Directive comes in June, you have to be ready for it. So here's a few practical things you can be doing now, and that will help. So we'll look at the practical steps here. Number one, you need to understand your pay structures internally. So it does mean you do need to review all your salaries. How are they set today? And if you were asked, would you be able to clearly explain why one role is paid differently to another? And if you can't, you need to figure that out. You need to be prepared to share salary information earlier. So have defined pay ranges. It doesn't mean that a job is 40,000 or 50,000, but you need to have clearly defined and sensible salary ranges. And I would get comfortable communicating them in job ads. You will get more applications, and that's what people are looking for. Like I said, you're losing out on 72% of candidates not having it in there. And we're talking about how you attract talent. It is really important that you start doing that. You got to get ready for employee questions as well. It's something I've been thinking quite a lot about internally here. Employees will have the right to ask how their pay compares to similar roles. Might not be required to report it yet, but you'll need the processes and answers in place, as we're doing here. And I think I actually really like it. I think transparency is brilliant. And if there's something that comes out of it that doesn't make sense, it gives an opportunity to fix it, because most of the time it's not done out of anything other than mistake. It's certainly not malice. And I think for the larger organizations, obviously you are preparing for reporting. So you will have done your gender pay gap data already. It needs to be accurate. You need to be able to explain gaps if they do exist. And then, of course, there will be consequences, because this is not about just putting together a report. It's about organizational accountability. And going back to the slide where we looked at men and women side by side, that everyone is getting paid the same for doing the same role. And that's really, really important as well. So a few things that will hopefully help you get ready for pay transparency. So before I dive in, feel free to pop in the chat what your key takeaways have been from today, and might help us lead to where we can do some more research down the line. While you're doing that, when advertising a salary, do you recommend a gross salary should include benefits and averages of 55K? No, I think when you're advertising a salary, it should be what they get before tax. I think is the simple answer to that, and any other benefits after that should be laid out clearly, whether that's in bullet point format in the job ad, but the salary is the salary. For those nervous about publishing salary bands, what's a realistic first approach ahead of the directive? I'd kind of go back to the points I made there. You kind of need to get comfortable with your salary bands. I think that's, do you believe you're paying people this firstly within your organization? Are they all being paid within the same salary band? Like, of course, there are reasons why, top performers might get paid a little bit more, and if you can clearly document that, that's actually fine. If you are hiring for salespeople, you might have a salary band depending on experience. Again, that's fine. So just to make sure that you're comfortable with the salary band. But the first thing to do for me would be go and benchmark your salaries in your industry for your location, and make sure that you are offering a fair band, because otherwise it won't help. But I do understand the nervousness. It's a big change for most companies, and although we're going the right direction, a lot still has to change. Okay, so key takeaways. Thanks for saying the trends are interesting, and I really appreciate you saying it's a brilliant webinar. We like getting good feedback, but after this you will all be asked for more feedback, because we like the good, the bad, and the ugly as well. So if there's anything you didn't like or you do like, we will definitely want to hear about it. But the big takeaway from today, it's pretty simple. candidates are no longer choosing jobs based on salary alone. They're choosing ecosystems. They're asking, is the role secure? Is it flexible? Is it fair? Is it transparent? And does it help me grow? I think that is really the biggest takeaway we have. But if I go back to build on Kira's advice from earlier, the organizations that will win the talent in 2026, they actually won't necessarily be the ones who pay the most. They'll be the ones who are clearest, fairest, and most transparent. They'll make it really easy for candidates to understand what a role offers, but also what it leads to and what it stands for. So build a transparent pay foundation. Like I said, define those clear salary ranges, design offers beyond salary. So lead with the benefits for candidates, the ones they value most, that health, the flexibility, pension contributions, well-being, progression, maybe nights out, whatever it might be. Make that progression visible. I'd go back to the idea of showing the career path in job ads. Have you got some really good examples of people who would be willing to share a video to candidates when you're communicating with them as well? And get into that skills-led hiring. So recruit for scarce and future skills, but you have to align the pay with the scarcity of that skill. So I think they're probably my main takeaways from today. Like I said, we have left some time here for Q&A if there's anything more that you'd like to ask. And then we will, of course, ask you for some feedback, which we would really appreciate as well. So if there are any more questions, I think we've answered everything that's there at the moment. Feel free to drop in the last ones if there are any more. I think we are all questioned out. I think 1:05 p.m. tends to lead to people thinking more about lunch. But thanks for everyone again for joining. Genuinely, we really appreciate it. And like I said, we would love some more feedback and hopefully see you at our next one in a few months' time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.